Not Like Us. I'm your host, Aaron, and today I am joined by Lauren Hayes. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Hi, thank you.
Can you tell people a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Lauren Hayes, and I am a relationship coach specializing in ethical non monogamy. So I coach couples that are either in ethical non monogamy, that can be swinging or polyamory, and or people who are wanting to get into it and know more about it. So kind of the E&M curious.
Okay. Is there uh, like a big demographic of people in that at the minute, or is it growing? What's kind of the
So
situation with
the stats kind of are, it's like 5 to 6% of the population that participates in this, and I think that might be a US stat. I think it's actually possibly a little higher in Europe, but it's a metric that's difficult to measure because we are sort of a hiding crowd, if you will. For the polyamorous, I think that's changing, but definitely not so much yet for the swinging crowd, and so I think it's a difficult thing to measure. And by all accounts, it is also a growing interest as well.
Cool. So I take it you kind of partake in one of those elements of non-monogamy. Um,
Yes.
what 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 made you to decide to kind of explore that kind of avenue?
Yeah. So my husband and I have been married for 19 years, and we've been ethically non monogamous for six. Um, actually, getting really close to our swingerversary. So we've mostly been swingers. Um, and, as I mentioned in E&M, there's kind of two models: polyamory, which is like you're in it for love and romantic relationships, and swinging, which is more like friendships and sexual adventure. But there's a lot of crossover between the communities, actually. So, um, and I would say not, well, yeah, there's just a lot of crossover. People can go back and forth. A lot of polyamorous people are never swingers, but a lot of swingers do dabble in polyamory. I'll put it in that way. I'll put it that way. And then, so the way we got into it was actually there's a little pre-story, which is I think we'd been married for maybe like 5 or 6 years, and I was approached by a guy, a friend of a friend, who was polyamorous and wanted to know if my husband and I were polyamorous because he wanted to date me. And so that was fascinating. I really, at that time, did not know anything about polyamory. So my answer was no, we're not. And that's fascinating. And so I had a really interesting conversation with him, asking all my questions. Um, then I got home, told my husband about that. He was fascinated, and neither one of us wanted to do it, but it like added this excitement to our sexual life for like about a week. Like there was just this energy to, like, someone trying to pick me up or something. So we had always had great sex. That week was like off the charts. So there was just an energy there, but again, we weren't really interested in doing it. But I always mention that part because I feel like it was maybe a little foreshadowing. So then I would say maybe 6 years later or more, my husband just brought it up. He was like, I just feel like there's something more. And I was caught very off guard, and I had a lot of the same reactions that people do when the partners bring this up, was like, oh, okay, I'm not enough, or you're not happy, or something. And so we muddled through a few weeks of those kinds of conversations, him assuring me that it was happy. He just felt like there was something else. I asked if he wanted a girlfriend. He was like, I don't really want a girlfriend. I just feel like there's something more. So we started kind of bumbling around on the internet, doing our own searches, and would come together. And eventually we found the book, The Ethical Slut. And that was super helpful for us. There are actually a lot of books out now about non monogamy, even in the last 5, 6 years. There have been a lot more. Um, but that book was great for us because it really outlined the menu, like what is ethical non-monogamy, how are the different ways that people practice it. So we had a date night every week anyway, and we just started discussing one chapter from the next. Okay, this is hot, this is not. What do you think? And having just really interesting conversation. That's one thing I can guarantee any couple is that if you start talking about ethical non-monogamy, even they are very interesting conversations. And so, yeah, my main fear, and honestly, my main fear to this day, is that we're going to end up wanting different things. But we've always just really been on the same page mostly with what we've wanted, and we've had a very good time. And we've, like I said, we've mostly participated as swingers, which means we've mostly participated as a couple um, versus dating people single. But we do a little bit of that as well.
How has your own journey into the non-monogamy kind of shaped how you coach others?
How I shifted to what?
Kind of how has it shaped how you coach other people?
Oh, how we court other people? Did you say court?
Sorry, it's my accent. I think coach, as in
Oh,
teach.
coach people. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was like, are you saying dating, but like courting? I haven't heard that term in a long time. Well, we can talk about that too, but in the coaching. So, yeah, I was not a relationship coach when we started this, and I have been coaching. So I did a program kind of coming out of COVID. This is kind of a boring story because so many people had the same thing. And, I had my little crisis during COVID of like, what do I really want to be when I grow up? Well, COVID and my age probably. And so ended up doing a coaching program, both life and relationship coaching. And then knowing pretty much that whole time I would take this in the direction of ethical non monogamy. So there is no relationship training for ethical non monogamy, like in the sort of academic world, if you will, which is not surprising. But so my training is Gottman training, which is a very popular, probably one of the biggest names in the relationship world. Even though all of their research is on monogamous relationships, there's a truth that I hold, which is non monogamous relationships and monogamous relationships are the same in terms of what makes up a healthy relationship. So the Gottmans have done decades of work on that, and that's not in dispute in non monogamy. I think one of the primary differences is because our relationships in non monogamy have to be operating at a much higher and healthier level in order to invite all the complexity in that we do. And if you are not operating at that higher and healthier level, I won't say higher, but healthier level, um, non monogamy will kind of whip your relationship into shape, or you'll stop doing it because it's kind of a workout for your relationship, if you will.
Yeah, I can imagine it's very difficult, and you've got to get that kind of communication bang on if you're going to go into anything like this.
Yeah, communication is a big one. And communication is a big topic in itself, actually. But like I said, even the day you start discussing it with your partner, even if you don't become non monogamous, these conversations always bring up a lot of interesting dialogue. So,
Yeah. What kind of unique insights have you gained then about kind of intimacy and relationships themselves from working with kind of non-monogamous couples?
yeah, so I'm actually more than midway on my book that I'm running right now, and it's 7 life and relationship lessons that I've learned through non monogamy. So I'll share some of those with you if that works.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so one of the life lessons that I think is really apparent is my first chapter is actually called Create Your Own Damn Life. So, one thing that is true for most of us, a vast majority of us, is that we've grown up in a monogamous culture. So we become monogamous because it's what we know. Like literally, if we know nothing else, that's just what we do. And I say that we um, do it. I don't think we have been taught it very well, actually, in our current system. But also, it's just what we do. We don't question it. Whatever. We find that one person, right? And we're supposed to be happy for the rest of our lives. Okay, so that is not even reality. I mean, most people become divorced. And um, this applies across the board to creating your own life. So, one thing for me that's been really interesting is when we moved to Utah, um, we were living in Texas at the time. My friends, so there's a very big lifestyle community. Lifestyle is the term, especially used by swingers for being like in this community, non monogamous community. Okay, and so there's a very large community in Utah, which surprises a lot of people, but it is mostly people who have left the LDS church. And what's really interesting about that is by leaving this very high demand religion, they're kind of left in this blank canvas space of like, I'm creating from nothing because I just left everything, which can be challenging and also freeing and very empowering. And so a lot of these people that I've become good friends with now are just very evolved, very cool people. So what I say, and is true, is that we all have the freedom to create our lives from virtually nothing. I know we have a lot of reasons why we don't think we should do that. One of them being maybe for this instance, stigma around non monogamy. I'm not going to consider that because it's not in alignment with what my family would agree with or what, my friends would agree with or whatever. There's a lot of fear. This applies to everything in life. It applies to where we live and who we marry and how we raise our children or if we have children. And so non-monogamy, I'm just kind of throwing it in the mix of like so few people even think about non-monogamy. So few people, well, I don't know about few people knowing, but a lot of people, I didn't really know about non-monogamy before I knew about non-monogamy. So one of my missions is just for people to like know about it. And I think polyamory is becoming more and more known, understood, accepted. Swinging, not so much. Um, but I love that they're blazing that trail. And, I think of a couple, like I said, if they even just talk about it or if they just hear about it, they turn to each other and they're like, I don't think that's for me. Me neither. Okay, good. Now we've just made a conscious choice about being monogamous. And I think the next great question to ask is like, do we feel like we're doing monogamy really well? And so that's one of the things my book does is it has conversation starters at the end of all the chapters. So this book is very much for monogamous people who are just wanting to kind of think about their relationship.
Yeah, you bring up some interesting points there, and it's funny that we never get taught how to have relationships, how to behave in relationships, and we kind of just mirror and copy what we see other people doing, really, right? Or kind of make it up as we go along.
Yeah.
But
And so often our parents were not the best examples.
yeah, it's not always ideal. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of shifts do you think the society need to have to kind of accept non-monogamy a bit more widely?
Well, I think we already accept a lot of the underlying beliefs that need to be there, but we have different ideas of when they should happen. So I would say, at least in the US culture, I feel like casual sex is an accepted behavior when you're in your 20s, when you're single. I mean, I don't think so. Our culture is still a very puritanically driven culture. And so, that sense, I think maybe the bigger message that people would like to believe, or maybe older people even, or religious people, is that that is not okay. I would say culturally speaking, it is okay. I mean, we have a show Sex in the City. Like this is a thing, right? Like it can be an acceptable behavior. When you're married becomes a different conversation. So doing this with your partner seems strange, odd, maybe wrong. Um, but that is one of the underlying sort of beliefs you have to accept this as an option, not only for yourself, but others, is that it's okay to be having sex that is not in a marital committed relationship. Now, for swinging, usually and not always, I never speak in absolutes because there's every situation you can think of out there, but generally speaking, it is couples that are having sex with other couples. This can be in the same room, this can be in separate room, this can be full swap, which is penetrative sex, this can be soft swap, which is kind of everything except for penetrative sex. So there are a lot of different things that can be happening. Now, kind of like many things in our culture, you don't have to want to do that to accept that other people are doing that. You don't even have to accept it as it being okay, as long as it's not hurting you. Like that's just kind of one of the underlying behaviors that just like the gay community, and I can talk about our overlap with the gay community in a second, but just like the gay community for a long time, it's like, well, I just can't believe that can be okay. And now we've evolved as a culture, like not only can it be okay, but it really doesn't affect me. And okay, like more and more rights are we're gone in that direction. I would say that we are sort of moving and would hope for that direction as well. Like, okay, I don't really approve of what you're doing, but it's fine that you're doing it. And then we can kind of go down that path. The other underlying belief that I think is necessary in the swinging world and not in the polyamorous world per se is that you can have multiple relationships and not fall in love with people. So this is one gets a little tricky, and this is a really interesting conversation between couples because we have a lot of underlying beliefs or even limiting beliefs that we're not conscious of. So one of the things that I ask couples is like, do you believe that you can have sex with a person and not have feelings for them? When I say feelings, I mean really like end up falling in love with them. And most times, if they're interested in ethical non monogamy, they'll say yes. The other question is, do you believe that we have some control over that particular emotion? Meaning, if I come into this with boundaries and intentions around what our relationship is going to be, can that be upheld? Or the other belief that some people have is that we are completely at the mercy of our emotions and who we end up having feelings for. So that can be an interesting question because while some people will believe that in general, that can be the case, that we can control our emotions, they may have a belief about their partner and themselves that is different. Like, I believe that I could have, these intentions and boundaries. I don't believe my partner can. So it just creates a lot of interesting conversations because you do have to actually have trust and belief that you both have that ability, or that that is a thing that you can go into relationship with intention and boundary and really create what you're looking for.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a minefield, kind of, and it comes back down to that communication thing, right? That communication is so crucial to all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also communicating about things that you've never thought about communicating about before. so, so that's what becomes super interesting.
Yeah, it can be some difficult conversations, right? Do you have like any kind of communication techniques that you kind of help people with to try and deal with the difficult conversations and to get the bottom of some of this stuff?
Yeah, so I would say, while I don't depend on any particular technique, what I will say is that communication is actually made up of some sort of subcategories of how we relate to each other. One is being truthful and fully self expressed. So, one thing that we often do in relationship is we don't really tell our partner what we want, really, because we are afraid that just wanting something is going to hurt their feelings. This is a very big topic in E&M because a lot of people are afraid to bring it up to their partner because they're afraid just being interested in or curious about it is going to hurt their partner's feelings. Well, it may or may not. But if this is a truth for you that you are interested or curious, then in an ideal relationship, you have the freedom to express that desire. your partner's going to have whatever reaction they're going to have. You can't control that reaction, but what you can do is you can create space. If you know this is something that's going to be controversial for them, you can create space to just let them have whatever emotional reaction they're going to have and not emotionally react in turn, because this is where we go down the path of conflict. That's why our desires can create conflict. If we can just hold space for our partner's feelings, and the biggest tool, like you just said, techniques, I would say the biggest tool in almost any conversation, and whenever you are stumbling around in a conversation, remember this, is curiosity. So if you notice yourself getting triggered about your partner's reaction, and maybe they are being belligerent at this point, it's, if you can, really turning to that curiosity and being like, I see this is really triggering you, and I would love to know more about that. And sometimes when we are very triggered, this is not a good time to actually have that conversation about, what we're curious about. I'm curious about why you're triggered about this, because we get into that physiologically triggered place, we're breathing heavy, our heart rate is up, we're not in a conversational space. So that would be a time when we say, let's take a break right now, but I'd love to come back later and talk about why, what your reaction is, where your reaction is coming from, because I love you. This has nothing to do with not loving you or not being happy. This has only to do with a curiosity that I have. And so it's having those types of conversations, which is emotionally vulnerable on both sides. I'm going to express a want that I have, and I don't know what your reaction is going to be. Then holding space, or so that's more emotional transparency, is actually, I'm going to share with you what I'm feeling and what I want despite your reaction. Then when they have the reaction, that is emotionally vulnerable. That is vulnerable for them because now they're going to have their emotional reaction. If you can both hold space for each other, for full self-expression and for full emotional reaction, that is where progress is made. Because then when you come back later and you feel heard and understood, and your partner feels heard and understood, that is where intimacy is created. And so you can imagine you're having pretty emotionally charged conversations from the beginning around this topic. And so very quickly, couples will report feeling closer with their primary partner if they have one, or with, even if they have multiple relationships, they will feel closer because they are able to have emotional, these emotional, I don't want to say conflicts, well, these emotional reactions that don't turn into conflict necessarily. A lot of them do. And then that's another skill is this conflict management piece. But if, and I always say these are ideal ways of managing things. We are human and we very rarely manage things in an ideal capacity, but you do get better at doing this. And you're also get better at the repair piece, and repair is something else that will actually have you feel closer.
Yeah, some of that stuff that you said on communication was like spot on, to be honest. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what you're communicating. If you get something that triggers somebody in that way, it is important to give them that space. But the real key thing, I think, is to come back with that curiosity, to ask the questions, to dig a little deeper and actually understand and find out what's going on there. Why are they having that emotional reaction? Because there's obviously something to that, something deeper. And I think that's something that a lot of us don't do in relationships, or don't do very well. We kind of listen to respond, and then that's when we get into the conflict stage, and we're just expressing our own opinions, and we never actually getting anywhere, or getting any kind of deeper level of understanding.
Yes, and I'm the first to admit that in these conversations, it can be very difficult to remember that very simple word about curiosity. So you might have to have the conflict, and then, oh, shoot, curiosity. Okay. And then come back with curiosity. And I say this only because as a coach, and we all do this, we talk a lot about the ideal way of handling things. And I always want people to give themselves so much grace, and their partners so much grace when we don't do it.
Yeah. Are there any kind of specific characteristics that kind of are essential for this kind of for entering into kind of non-monogamy as a couple?
Yes, I say the most important thing is having self awareness. Um, so I have a lot of funny conversations, especially around swinging, because it's such people are attracted to it so much because of the sexual adventure piece. And so I get a lot of questions about, like, well, do I need to get a boob job, or do I need to have a big cock, or like they're like really concerned about these things that do not matter at all. And I'm like, no, actually, what you need is self awareness. Um, the issue with self awareness, and I think that this is an interesting thing I ponder a lot, because I think the same thing as being funny or having good taste. We all think we're funny. We all think we have good taste, but do we really? We all also feel like we're self aware. I saw a stat once, and I have no idea how anyone could possibly figure out the stat. So I don't know its validity, but it said that 80% of people feel that they are self aware and they are not. Um, so I think I'm self aware. But maybe I am a part of that majority. But that really is the most important, because of that conversation that we just talked about. If I'm going to have an emotional reaction to something and you're going to get curious about what is behind that, I have to be able to go internally and figure out what might be behind that. I might not know right away, and that's a fair answer. Like, I don't know right now. All I know is that I'm really upset or I'm really angry. But then I'm going to take that away. I'm going to be able to like mull that over. I'm going to maybe be able to come up with some theories and keep talking about it. Because emotions are tricky. We don't always know exactly. But that little space that I'm creating inside of myself, that is self awareness. Like, I'm having this reaction. I recognize that that's like, ugh, and I'm going to pull back and like think about that and share with you.
Yeah, and I think it kind of depends as well with people on where they are in their life, kind of what stage of life they're in, because even people who are generally self-aware, if they're going through kind of difficult time or whatever,
Ugh,
can be
yeah.
become less so, and or if they've had past trauma, maybe they're just not able to deal with certain aspects of it. I think kind of self-awareness is more of a sliding scale really than a yes or no, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that is true. I like how you put that. And also, I think life stage makes a very big difference as well. That is something that comes with maturity in general. And most people, I think the average age, I don't know if there's an average, but the time frame that people typically get into ethical non-monogamy is like mid 30s to mid 50s. And so this is a sort of different life stage time when you probably have more self awareness, and that actually has you think about non monogamy in a different way.
Yeah, I suppose if we're not able to look in, and sometimes, and I think this is probably true of me when I was younger, I wasn't willing to look in. I didn't want to, you know what I mean? I always wanted to look out. That's kind of how you are. And I think as you get older in life, naturally, you kind of look in more. You kind of look at yourself a bit more. You become, I wouldn't say I've become more self-aware, but I've been kind of actively working on myself more and kind of acting on that self-awareness more.
Yes. I mean, I think that is another aspect. And I actually usually lump this into self awareness. So I like that you're breaking it out. I think that valuing of personal growth is also a necessary attribute when you're in ethical non monogamy. It sort of just happens. Like I said, it's complicated. If you can work through the complications, you're almost naturally obtaining some personal growth. Whether you value that or not is another question. And I think typically there's a natural value to it because you are naturally a little happier. when you become more self-aware, able to manage your emotions, maybe understand yourself a little bit better, I think that does bring kind of a little bit of more of a content with yourself kind of feeling.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's a peace that comes with it, right? And it's just a
Yeah.
kind of a calm that you can kind of look at life from a just a more comfortable standing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Uh, it do you deal with many couples who have children? Because that must really mess with the dynamic a bit.
Well, because of the age range that people are typically getting into it, I would say it's more common to have children than not have children. Um, and well, I can share our personal story. So when we got into it, our kids were 10 and 12 years old. And of course, we weren't sharing anything about anything. And it wasn't even, there's a couple of reasons. One, when you're first getting into it, you don't really know if this is something you're going to do long term. You're just kind of like, let's see what this is like and whatever. The longer you're in it, you it becomes a little bit more a part of your identity. So there's a difference in like, why would I ever share my sexual adventures with my children versus maybe I would share this because it's a part of me. And of course, you're still not ever sharing sexual details, but it's now a part of you. And so that is why you would maybe just tell your children or family and friends, because this is sort of the natural progression that people don't tell anyone in the beginning. And then over time, they will share. Like I said, this can be a little bit different in the polyamorous community. I would say there's more openness to share for a couple of reasons. One, it can be more of an identity from the get-go. Some people will say I am polyamorous in the same way that people will say I am gay. You know, this is something that's in me and I was born this way. So I think that always gives a stronger pass. People are like, oh, okay, then that's fine. Okay. And then, but when you get down, and then there's a kind of this continuum when you get down to swingers, like we're just doing this for, friendship, sex, and pleasure. It's like really more about the community, but we'll have that conversation in a second. Um, and so it becomes more difficult for people to accept. But as it becomes more of your identity and or you actually spend more time with that community, it becomes a little um, restrictive on your vanilla friendships. Vanilla is the term we use for anyone that is not in lifestyle. um, so and that is, it's funny. One of the other podcasts I was on, he was offended by this vanilla term, but I always took it as like vanilla is the most popular flavor still to this day, and so monogamy is the more popular flavor. But if you kind of have these lifestyle friends, you have your vanilla friends, and while they may not merge, you are sharing your full self with your lifestyle friends, and you are hiding part of yourself from your vanilla friends. And so this does start to create some at least internal conflict for people, and that is why they will start sharing that with friends or family or whomever they feel like that conflict is kind of coming up for.
Yeah, do you think that's difficult for people? Because do you think there's, especially maybe certain generations, there might be a kind of
You froze up. I don't know if you can
they
hear
might
me.
see that it undermines traditional values of commitment and stuff like that, especially the more traditional people. Do you think that's a difficult conversation?
You just froze. Can you repeat your question? I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Sorry. So I'm just asking because obviously sharing it with other friends who are like not in the community or not been involved in it, or maybe a bit more traditional.
Yeah,
Do you think it's kind of difficult to come out to those people under the fear that that they might criticize non-monogamy and because they might see that or see it that it kind of undermines traditional values of commitment?
absolutely. And I would say that's a very big consideration for people when they're deciding who to tell and whom not to tell. And also, like I said, when this really becomes a bigger part of your identity, there is an element of like, we're not expecting anyone to join us. We're not expecting anyone to celebrate us. We're just letting you know that this is part of what we do. And you kind of get to a point where you're like, well, if they're not going to be friends with me just because of this, and this is a big part of who I am, then maybe they're not as good of friends as I thought. So there can be some of that. I know a lot of people have very complex journeys around telling family or parents. I mean, because I think, then you're getting into more of a category of what you're talking about. Um, and we're all always afraid of disappointing our parents, right? So um, that gets tricky. And that's why I said it's just such a personal journey for every couple. We've actually now told our kids, they are 16 and 18. Um, and the reason is because I'm a lifestyle coach now. I go on podcasts all the time. I'm writing a book. So we felt strongly that we wanted to be the ones to tell our children and not somebody else to tell our children. So we told them. Their reaction was very much like, this is not a big deal. Our daughter said, I'm actually offended that you didn't tell us before. And then they said, the kids of our generation, we don't really care about this kind of stuff. And I said, yeah, I get that. And the parents of the kids of your generation, they still do. So I said, this is not a secret. This is not something we're ashamed of. And just be thoughtful about who you tell, because there's a reason I haven't shared this with the people at your private school. And so, it's just a balance. And um, what I think is really unfortunate is that in this time of so much more acceptance of sexual orientation and the whole world of not only sexual orientation but desires and um, behaviors and all kinds of, and gender fluidity and all the things that we're really like wrapping our heads around as a society and a culture, that swingers in particular still feel like we have to be so secretive. And so I'm actually out to change that a little bit. I'm not trying to convert anyone, and never, okay, I am not one of those people. And there are actually very few people in the community who do feel that non monogamy is better than monogamy. It's better for them. It doesn't mean it's better for everyone. And I would never even suggest that to be the case. I just want people to know about it and accept it so that we don't have to keep meeting in these secret clubs because, we can't let anybody know what we're doing.
Yeah, I'd almost go the other way and say it's only for people who can kind of tolerate, or we're in that kind of really secure foundation relationship, who can communicate. And I suppose you coach people to get to that point, but it's kind of, until you're at that point, for me, I wouldn't kind of feel comfortable telling people to just go and do it if they hadn't got that kind of foundation, that background where they can communicate, they can talk through the issues and deal with stuff and move forward, because it's just setting them up to fail, right?
That is such an important point. So, a lot of people, I think on outside, one of the bigger misconceptions is that somehow we're not happy in our current relationships and we're just out there looking for somebody else. And I would say almost nothing could be further from the truth because of what you just said. You really have to be in a very secure and safe relationship to attempt this in a healthy way. And that's one of the first questions I ask couples is, are you doing this to fix something in your relationship? Because if you're doing it to fix something, it is most likely going to highlight that crack that you have in your foundation. And if you haven't been able to deal with that already in a healthy way, then ethical non-monogamy is not going to help you do that in a healthy way per se. So I always suggest for couples, it doesn't mean non-monogamy is not for you. If you're well aware of what you're trying to fix, then go fix that thing. Then when you get in a happier, safer, more secure place, you will either A, not feel like doing ethical non-monogamy anymore because you thought it was just going to fix that one thing, or you're actually in a place where you could actually do this in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think by dealing with the difficult issues, if you have dealt with difficult issues and you're able to get through that stuff, you kind of build in the tools to be able to then step on and do the non-monogamy, ultimately, because you've learned how to deal with difficult situations with each other, how to work through things, how to communicate, how to get to the bottom of things, without, just looking for a quick fix all the time.
Yes, and that is a great point also. Are you non-monogamous? Because you seem to be hitting all the right points.
No, I'm not. No.
Okay, but yeah, that's a great point. And there are a lot of things that come up that, and this is why coaches exist in this space, because there are things that come up. It's like, oh, wow, this feels bigger than, like, I can't really figure out what we do next out of this particular conflict. And that's fair. And some things do just take time to work themselves out. And that's probably one of my personal frustrations is like, okay, I see the problem. Like, let's just fix that and move on. But it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, these things take time. If you could see a major change in kind of in the conversation about relationships and how relationships are viewed over the next kind of 5 years, what would it be for you?
Um, I would say probably that first point that I made about creating your own life, that people understand all the options, because yes, there's non-monogamy and there's monogamy. Then within each one of those buckets, you can create anything you want. So there are people that have threesomes and kind of partake in non-monogamous behavior. They don't consider themselves non-monogamous because there's also sort of a, like I said, almost like an identity that can start to go along with that. And they're like, well, we're just doing this for sexual adventure. So, underlying this creation of whatever you're creating in your relationship, there is another idea that am I wanting more people to understand, which is we are human. We love to connect to other humans. There's no disputing this fact. Okay, what we have created in our monogamous relationship is that there is acquaintance and friend and maybe best friend, and then there's in love and in relationship. Non-monogamy operates in the space from hello, how are you, to just maybe underneath, I'm in love with you. And we recognize that there are so many levels of friendship and connection that happen in this space before you get to I'm in love with you. And you may never, ever even get close to I'm in love with you. But this is something that isn't really recognized by our culture. And this creates a lot of fear, even in the monogamous relationships, of our partners creating these other relationships, which might be very healthy and totally safe. But we don't allow that connection to sort of happen. One of the questions that I get so often from monogamists is, aren't you afraid that your partner is going to meet somebody else and run off with them? And what I really want to ask back, and I usually don't because it's rude, is, well, aren't you? Because monogamy does not keep us safe from our partners meeting other people and running off. This happens actually all the time. Affairs happen on a very frequent basis. So I think it's interesting that there is this veil over monogamy, that we are safe from hurt in monogamy, that is untrue. And if we are not always working on our relationships and talking to our partners and finding out that we're both happy and we're in a healthy place, then those same things can happen to anyone, monogamous or not. Are we putting ourselves out there with more risk for that? Yes, probably. And I'm also going to argue that we're in some pretty damn safe and secure relationships in order to do this behavior. So there's kind of there might be a net there. I don't really know. And again, there are just not a lot of statistics or valid statistics around non-monogamy, because so many people, it's hard to find them to survey them, right? Because they're not being forthcoming in that. But that's changing. I do think that's changing.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Again, you won't get many stats on it and stuff because a lot of people won't share the fact that they do it, and those that are willing to are generally, like you say, in very secure relationships, in a confident, comfortable place where they've got their boundaries set up. And I think because you're going into this kind of world, you've discussed boundaries, and you've agreed on where the line is. Whereas in normal kind of monogamous relationships, you don't generally have those conversations. It's just kind of assumed, and
Yeah.
then people cross the line, and things get, and then that's where things tend to go horribly wrong.
Yeah, and there is an unwritten boundary or unsaid boundary. Well, I guess we do say it, but it's it's also implied in monogamy that you're not going to meet somebody else and run off with them, and that we have a boundary that we're only going to be friends with other people and not create other romantic relationships. So that boundary is in place. Um, but I think the fear aspect can sort of mess it up a little bit. Like I was just saying, like you can have all kinds of healthy connections. And I see plenty of monogamous relationships where partners have friends of the opposite sex. That's a secure relationship. That's, they're talking about these things. They know what their boundaries are. Um, and I see lots of monogamous relationships also where you even talk to someone of the opposite sex and, that partner's feeling insecure. So there are boundaries, and then there are also like, let's have healthy conversations about these boundaries and why they're in place and what we're really comfortable with and why we're not comfortable with more and whatever.
Yeah, I think for people who have not had any experience of kind of non-monogamy or that world, I think a lot of people have. There's like a stigma around it still, isn't there? I think for a lot of people. Um, and do you think, you know, do you think that there's a way to change that narrative over the kind of coming years?
The particular one with like being able to be sex with other people or being friends with other people, that was a funny slip up. To being friends with other people, like even in monogamous relationships, because I don't think being friends with other people implies any kind of non-monogamy. It just implies a freedom and a trust that hopefully would exist in most relationships.
No, I was talking generally about the stigma about
Oh, the stigma.
the traditional people have, or traditional view has, of non-monogamy, really.
Um, yes and no. I do. I mean, religion plays a very big part in the stigma. Religion is becoming less and less popular. So, almost naturally over time. And like I said, with the LGBTQ community, those attitudes are shifting. And I think our like attitudes towards our behavior in our communities will follow. Um, are following, I would maybe even say, but it's a little bit difficult for me to assess. I mean, we're on the brink of maybe electing Donald Trump as a president again, right? So I feel like I'm a little out of touch with possibly the general population. So I have a hard time answering that. So I would say maybe um, going off of the trends with the LGBTQ community is a good measure of like where we're headed as well. And there is also a big overlap between our community and the LGBTQ community because a lot of a big reason that people will start practicing non-monogamy is that one or the other partner, or I suppose both, um, recognize a bisexual part of themselves that they want to explore, and their partners are willing to support them in the exploration. I think that's often less threatening for people when they're like, oh, my husband would be like, oh, you want to date other women? That's fine. Or I might be like, oh, you want to date men? That's fine. Because I can't be that, right? Like that's a part of them that you can't fulfill, and that's very clear. So sometimes that can be an easier, or it is a big reason that people will get into it. And I think I see that sometimes that's easier for their partner to accept as a reason to get into that community. Once you're in the community, lots of different things can happen and everybody's experiences start shifting, but that is like a big reason that that will happen. Also, the polyamorous community is more diverse than the swinger community. I'm pretty confident in saying, in the sense that within the poly community, there's a bigger overlap with the LGBTQ community. You might have, I mean, for example, the gay community has been practicing non-monogamy for much longer than, or maybe not longer, but more openly for a long time. So there are overlaps between the communities, and those are kind of it. And I would say sort of that driver of even the conversation of like, how much am I going to allow you to do in your own world because it doesn't affect me? That's the direction I think we've been going.
Yeah, I think it's important that people kind of, if it doesn't affect them, then why do they care? Why do they why cause a fuss about anything really?
Yes.
Let
Yes.
people consensually enjoy themselves and go and do what they want to do. It doesn't hurt you in any way. So I don't know why
I
people get
know.
kind
And
of up
it's
in arms about it.
such a waste of everybody's energy. It's a waste of their energy to care, and it's a waste of our energy to hide. I mean, yeah.
If you could go back to your beginning, right, when you started this journey, what's one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
The piece of advice I always give people is to take baby steps. Um, and I think what baby steps can look like is different than what people think it is. So, for swinging in particular, I will say, going to a sex or a swinger club can seem like a big step or a big swinger event. You will see a lot, and depending on the event, it might be too much too soon. And that's my caveat on that. But at these bigger events and at these clubs, you can just be an observer. And, the first time my husband and I went to a club, we didn't talk to anybody else the whole night. This was just us, like, first of all, totally nervous newbies, not knowing what we're doing. Um, and just wanting to observe sort of the vibe and what goes on at these places. We ended up having sex, the two of us, several times. We kind of upped our baby steps throughout the night. The first time was in a private room with the door closed. The second time was in a room but with the door open so people could watch. And then the third time was in the middle of the space that we were in. And again, we didn't talk to anybody else. We didn't have any interaction really with other people. This was just about our own experience. We learned that that was a vibe that was sexy and enticing to us, and that kept us on the track. So, what I like to, and this is where the self awareness piece comes in, and this is probably the hardest part. Where you want to operate is just outside your comfort level. So, because that is where you're going to be operating when you are learning about non monogamy, because very few people know much about non monogamy. And you're just learning, you don't know what you don't know. So, you're just starting. That's probably one of the first steps, is to learn all the things like, what do I not know? So then when you start doing things, you want to be operating just outside of your comfort level, because if they don't go well, or not in the way that you anticipated, then you could probably do it again. So we have a phrase. I don't think it's exclusive to the swinger community, but which is, we'll try anything twice. So, because every situation is so different. Okay, so if you're just outside your comfort zone, it doesn't go how you thought it might go. You're like, okay, I could maybe do this again. If you go way outside of your comfort zone and something doesn't go as you expected, what usually is going to happen is that's going to create more fear. So rather than expanding your comfort zone over time, you actually constrict it into more fear and less growth because of this wild step. Now, has everyone heard of the people that just jump into the deep end of swinging and they love it and they're off to the races? Yes, it's just not what I recommend to people who are just starting out.
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult at the start anyway for people to take them baby steps anyway. They'll probably feel like big leaps at the start anyway. So
Yeah,
it's probably good
that can
advice to
be. And I think it's
yeah.
different for polyamory. I would say most people in the swinging community would agree with the statement that we all feel that polyamory is even harder. I think when you're doing this new stuff with your partner, you've got a partner in crime, right? Not to insinuate we're doing anything illegal. um, but and so that can make it easier. That's what can make you feel closer. I think in polyamory, that's a little bit more complicated because figuring out your baby steps might be a little like those baby steps might feel emotionally bigger.
Yeah, that must be more difficult when there's, that emotional tie involved and that kind of, you're letting somebody else into that kind of vulnerable space as well, aren't you, really? Rather than just kind of friendship, you're trying to make things go deeper, really.
Right.
So, what's the most significant lesson you've learned about yourself, Lauren, during this journey?
Okay, so chapter 4 is love your partner, but love yourself a little bit more. So ultimately, and this is a little cliche or something that you hear all over the place, but how important your relationship to yourself is if you're going to be in relationship with anyone else. That ultimately you to all these things that we've been talking about, know what you want, be able to express what you want, that already takes a love of yourself. I am I grew up becoming a people pleaser. And so that is a particular trait, or you can call it some codependent tendencies. That is a trait in relationship that does not last very long in non monogamy because these are, even we're talking about baby steps, if these are things you don't want to be doing any of these things for someone else. And so and this continues along every step of the journey. And so it's constantly asking yourself, what do I want? And what if what I want is in conflict to what my partner wants? When I just said that, there are people pleasers around the world listening to this podcast that just went because it's hard to like really, when you're a people pleaser, your peace comes from knowing that other people are happy with what you're doing. So what if the thing that you want, your partner is not going to be happy about? Or what if there's something your partner wants that you can't get behind? You're going to have to get behind yourself, because this is how staying true to yourself through this, you're not going to believe this, people pleasers out there, but this is what creates more intimacy in your relationship. When you love yourself and you put yourself a little bit first, that actually strengthens your relationship and it makes it healthier.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with that more. You need to, take care of yourself, and I've said this a few times on the show now, but it's uh, the way I envisage it is, to know when you're on a plane and they come out and they do the safety announcement, they always say, put your mask on
Yeah.
first before you help anybody else. And I think it's so crucial that we do that we look after ourselves and be the best person that we can be, and then we can be vulnerable, we can be open, we can be honest, and we can give to our partner, a relationship, and a partner that they deserve, and in return they'll respond to that and reciprocate, and that's how you get deep, meaningful connections.
Yes. And I even say this because, again, having a recovering, I think there's always recovering people pleaser. You can still people please. You're going to become conscious of it because there's a situation. I want something different than that person wants. If if you're a people pleaser, your knee jerk reaction is just, I'm going to do what they want. Without even considering yourself. Now you're considering yourself first. And now you go, you know what? I am going to go along with this thing. Now it is your choice. Now you are at the center of that. There's no victimhood anymore because you just chose that. And so that is very, very powerful.
Absolutely, and I think, that goes for all relationships. Monogamous or not. It's
Absolutely.
You absolutely need to be in that space to have a healthy, relationship.
Well, and that's the premise of my whole book. All these life and relationship lessons are for everybody. I happen to learn them through non-monogamy, but that's why people will want to read my book because they don't even have to be non-monogamous and they can still learn all the lessons.
Absolutely. Well, I've taken a lot from this, so it's been really really good. When is the book out, Lauren?
It's going to be out by the end of this year. What I recommend if people want to follow me and follow the forthcoming book is to just go to my website, swinginglifestylecoach.com, and sign up for my newsletter there. I am not a heavy newsletter sender, so but it's a great way just to stay up with what I'm doing.
Cool. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for that anyway, so people can
Okay,
kind of
cool.
connect with you and find you and stuff. Is
Yeah.
there is there a most rewarding part of your job? Is there anything that stands out as the most rewarding
Mm.
aspect of your coaching or?
Yeah, one of my most rewarding parts. So there's a really interesting dynamic that happens with women in particular. So because of these conflicting messages that we get in our culture around you can be sexy but not too sexy, you should only be sexy in the bedroom, but then you should be very conservative out in the world. And again, these are all very American, but I think it we're not that different. Um, that there's like a frustration that we all experience as women around these conflicting messages when you get into the community, the non-monogamous community. There is a very different relationship to especially women's sexuality. This is a place where people, women in particular, can safely express their sexual sides. One thing that I talk about a lot is like when my husband and I were getting into this, it was like, well, I had no reference for like in quote dating other people other than my single life, right? But so in my single life, if I was out to a club and you flirt or smile with some guy, depending on this guy's reaction, you may have ruined your whole night because now they are, they're on you like the whole night. And that that flirting, that smile, can actually create some kind of weird expectation. In lifestyle, this does not exist. And when I say does not exist, I always say that I don't speak in absolutes, and that's very absolute. So let me just say it generally does not exist. Women are able to express themselves. They are able to wear whatever they want. They're able to dance however they want. They can flirt with whomever they want. And there are no expectations ever. So I see women over and over just embrace this part of the community. I see husbands and partners over and over just loving watching their partner really connect, explore, and love this other part of themselves in all these different ways. And what this does is it brings a whole nother level of confidence to women, especially. So, and sometimes this can make their partners a little bit insecure, which I think is super interesting. But usually they're like so celebrating it. And so, for example, I was speaking to one of my clients the other day. They're in their 60s, they just got into this. She just had this amazing sexual experience the other night with her husband. And she's like, I'm just really walking taller every day. Like this is something that we can bring in. It becomes a part of us, being able to connect with this part of us that is there. We are sexual beings, but being able to have this truer relationship with this part of ourselves is very empowering.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and it's I suppose, especially at kind of nightclubs and that kind of environment where it can be really horrible, right? It can be a horrible experience, especially I'm not a woman myself, but I can imagine for women because you go to a lot of these places and there's generally a lot of men there as well, and it just doesn't feel safe almost, if you know what I mean. Not to say that everybody's a predator or anything like that, but it can feel that way on times, and you always get the ones that make people feel uncomfortable and just cross the line too much.
I know it's interesting because certainly most people are not predators, but it only takes one to really kind of ruin your evening. And so that is a truism that, I think a lot of us grew up with. I would love to think that's changing for younger generations. I don't know. I don't know if it is.
I don't know. I tend to stay out of nightclubs, to be honest. I can't. It's not my vibe anymore.
Yeah.
I can't deal with the hangovers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but like I say, it's about having that safe environment as well, and where you can kind of express yourself without kind of fear of even just kind of low level hassle, really, without that kind of fear of having hassle or being pestered, and just kind of looking over your shoulder all the time, and nobody wants that, right?
Yeah. And for women, and again, I'm going to speak to just people like generationally closer to my generation because I don't know for all, but um, it is this constant balance. Like when you're getting dressed at night and like what it's always like, am I appropriate? Because ultimately, if we're somehow judged as inappropriate in any situation, then any of the consequences are justified, right?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of how I've seen. Yeah. Um, Lauren, it's been absolutely amazing having you on the show. I've taken up quite enough of your time. Do you have any kind of final thoughts or messages that you want to leave us with?
I guess my final message might be something that we've touched on twice, but just to kind of leave this one behind, that non-monogamy is an option for people. It it's out there. It is a thriving community. It's a safe place. There are many avenues. You're in charge of creating your own life and your relationship. This may not be for you, but also just accepting it out there as an alternative.
Yes, fab. And ultimately, I think the majority of advice that you've shared through this just applies to all relationships, really. Anyway,
Absolutely.
I think it's so key to getting that foundation and getting a relationship, regardless which path you choose to go down. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It was fun.
No problem. Take care.
Thanks.